One of the great tragedies of the modern West is that people have been indoctrinated into the belief that to believe in God is to believe something against science or against logic. In this video, Frank Turek is laying out a case during a debate that he has with Christopher Hitchens, and he lays out the science and the logic that actually defy unbelief in God and the case that can be made through inference for God. With that being said, let's dive in.
I'm going to give you evidence in an acronym, SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I think even Christopher in his book on page 65 says the Big Bang is the accepted origin of the universe. S stands for the second law of thermodynamics, that the universe is running down. As that sun is up there, it is burning out. Ultimately, we will go to heat death, as Christopher has said in his book. Well, if the universe is eternal, that sun would have burned out a long time ago, but since the sun is still up there and we still have energy here, the universe must have had a beginning. The second law of thermodynamics also says that ordered things go toward disorder. It affects the school. We have to paint the walls. We have to put gas in our car. The second law of thermodynamics also affects us as human beings. When you get older, the second law of thermodynamics is seen by the fact that we all get dresser disease. That's when our chest falls into our drawers. See, that's the second law of thermodynamics. The U in SURGE is the fact that the universe is expanding, discovered by Edwin Hubble in 1929. Hubble deduced that if the universe is expanding, if you watched everything in reverse, you would see it collapse back to a point, mathematically and logically, to nothing. So the universe exploded into being out of nothing. The G stands for the great galaxy, the R stands for the radiation echo, discovered by accident by Penzias and Wilson, two scientists working at Bell Labs in Homedale, New Jersey. They discovered basically the radiation afterglow, or the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion. The heat is still out there. It's just a couple of degrees above absolute zero. Now, good theories predict future discoveries, and they said if the radiation afterglow is out there and the Big Bang really did occur, we ought to find very fine temperature variations among the radiation afterglow. So they sent up a satellite in 1989 to circle the Earth. It's called the Kobe Space Satellite, to measure this radiation afterglow. And for 3 years, they found nothing until they tuned their instruments just a little bit more precisely and found that there were temperature variations in the radiation afterglow, and they were down to 1 part in 100,000. George Smoot, the leader of the expedition, said, if you're religious, it's like looking at God. Stephen Hawking said this is the greatest discovery of cosmology, perhaps the greatest discovery of all time. Those temperature variations allowed galaxies to ultimately form, so we could ultimately be here. The E in SURGE stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity, which says time, space, and matter are correlative. You can't have space without time. You can't have time without space and matter. And in effect, it says that the universe came into existence with space and time together. In other words, once there was no time, once there was no space, once there was no matter, and then bang, out of nothing, the universe exploded into being. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said nothing is what rocks dream about. Nothing. There was no thing. There was not positive and negative energy, as Isaac Asimov has said. There was not a vacuum. There was not swirling mathematical points, as Dr. Atkins has said from Oxford. There was nothing, what rocks dream about, which means that the universe exploded into being, all space, all matter, all time, out of nothing. And several scientists have pointed this out. Stephen Hawking said almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Agnostic astronomer Robert Jastrow, the man who sits in Edwin Hubble's chair, or who did until February when he died, he was an agnostic. He sat at Mount Wilson and looked through Hubble's telescope. He wrote a book in 1978 called God and the Astronomers. And here's what Jastrow wrote. Or here's what he said, actually, in an interview. He said, astronomers now found they painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this has happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Wow. Why isn't an agnostic astronomer saying supernatural forces are at work? Why couldn't nature have created the universe? Because there was no nature. There was nothing, what rocks dream about, and then the entire space-time continuum leapt into existence. If it's not a natural cause, by definition, it must be a supernatural cause, something beyond the natural. In fact, Arthur Eddington, the contemporary of Einstein, who was an expert in general relativity, said, quote, "The beginning seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look on it as frankly supernatural." So the cosmological argument leaves us with one question. Either no one created something out of nothing, or someone created something out of nothing. The atheistic view is no one created something out of nothing. The theistic view is someone created something out of nothing. Which view is more reasonable? I think Julie Andrews had it right. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could. That's the cosmological argument. The teleological argument, the design argument, actually has two arguments contained within it. It is the argument from design. And there are dozens of factors about the universe that are precisely designed for the existence of the universe and life. So not only did the universe explode into being out of nothing, it did so with incredible precision. Stephen Hawking has noted that the universe would not exist if there was a decrease in the expansion rate 1 second after the Big Bang by only 1 part in 100,000 million. This led Hawking to conclude it would be very difficult to explain why the universe should have begun in just this way, except as an act of God who intended to create beings like us. Not only is it designed in terms of its expansion, but the gravitational force is so precise. If you change the gravitational force by 1 part in 10 to the 40, nothing would exist. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40? Stretch a tape measure across the entire known universe. Set gravity at 1 inch on that, anywhere on that tape measure. If you move gravity, the force of gravity, 1 inch in either direction, we don't exist. There's also factors about our universe, in particular our solar system, that cannot be explained unless there's a designer behind it. For example, the Earth rotation, 24 hours, just right. If it was a little bit more, a little bit less, we wouldn't be here. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees, just right. Change that a little bit, we're not here. The Jupiter being in its current orbit, if Jupiter wasn't there, we'd be bombarded with space material. Why? Because Jupiter acts as a cosmic vacuum cleaner. It attracts all the cosmic space junk to it rather than us. There are a number of other factors I don't have time to get into, but Arno Penzias, the man who co-discovered the R in surge, the radiation afterglow, said this: "Astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which as an underlying, one might say, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan." A friend of Christopher, atheist Steven Weinberg, who is an atheist, put it this way: "Life as we know it would be impossible if any one of several physical quantities had slightly different values." So not only is the universe precisely tweaked, and by the way, there would be no life unless the universe was precisely fine-tuned, as I just mentioned, but life itself is designed. Let me take you to your breakfast table for just a second. Suppose you wanted to have a bowl of alphabet cereal. You're a teenager, and you come downstairs to have a bowl of alphabet cereal, and you see the alphabet cereal's knocked over, and the letters from the alphabet cereal are spelled out on the placemat, and it spells, "Take out the garbage, Mom." What are you going to assume? Cat knocked the box over? Earthquake shook the house? Or are you going to say, no, that's intelligent design from an intelligent being? Or let's say you're laying out on the beach and you see in the clouds, "Drink Coke." What are you going to assume? Unusual cloud formation? No, you're going to say there has to be a skywriter up there, even if you didn't see him. Why? Because messages only come from minds. Well, it turns out there's a message in all life called DNA. We all know about it. All life has a message. I have DNA, you have DNA, a banana has DNA. In Darwin's day, it was not known how incredibly complex, simple, so-called simple life is. And they thought that maybe simple life could come together without intelligent intervention, and ultimately natural selection could take over. It's the theory of macroevolution. I'm sure you've heard of it, from the goo to you via the zoo. From the infantile to the reptile to the crocodile to the gentile. That's the theory of macroevolution. The problem is that now we know that this intelligent life couldn't have come together by natural laws, because We now know that the simplest life has the amount of specified complexity or information in it in terms of DNA of 1,000 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, who's that according to? Not a Christian, not a theist. That's according to Richard Dawkins from his book Blind Watchmaker. I think it's page 116. Now, to believe that that resulted by natural law is like believing that the Library of Congress resulted from an explosion in a printing shop. See, I don't have enough faith to believe that. So life appears to be designed. In fact, Antony Flew, who was an atheist, a very prominent atheist, but recently became a theist, or at least a deist, as a result of this evidence, said, it is impossible for evolution to account for the fact that one single cell can carry more data than all the volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica put together. It now seems to me that the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument from design. How am I doing on time, Dean? 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. Design is so prevalent that even people like Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA, Sir Fred Hoyle, who coined the term Big Bang in a derisive way, are now, or were, proponents of panspermia. Seeds everywhere, in other words, that life got deposited here by aliens, which is just kind of a backhanded way of saying that there's no way we know how life came by natural causes here. There must be aliens out there that brought it here, which of course just puts the question off one more step. Where did the aliens come from, right? There's a lot more on the design argument, but I'm running out of time here. Let me just give you one quote from Chandra Wickramasinghe, who is a student of Sir Fred Hoyle. He said, the emergence of life from a primordial soup on Earth is merely an article of faith. Sir Fred Hoyle said, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature.
I just want to suggest the idea that it is not a matter of science or mathematics or logic that prevents people from believing in God. It is some predetermined a priori notion about what God is like, and the fact that he is not the type of God who someone wants to worship. To go from a pure abstract conversation about whether or not God does exist is only really part of the equation. What is now important is to say, what is this God really like? And if you have a bad view of who God is, then you're not going to want to believe in him. And there have been many different studies that have shown that a person's willingness to believe in something is directly tied to their desire to believe in that thing. I really think that this is essential to understanding the prevalence of atheism, or even the rise of atheism that some people are talking about, or the religiously unaffiliated. But to me, again, I think it comes back to a bad view of who God is that is not rooted in God's actual reality, but it is rooted in some human failure that has been done on behalf of God. So my plea to you watching this video, if you are finding yourself in the position of being an atheist or a seeker or a skeptic, is to go and look to Jesus. Look to the life of Jesus. Actually, just read the gospel according to John if you haven't, and see if you find any error in his ways, or see if there is a ring of truth through the life of Jesus that reflects what we would expect to find from a perfectly good, loving, and powerful creator of the universe and of our species here on little old planet Earth. Read the gospel according to John. And also, one other sort of suggestion within that is, don't be among the people who looked into his face and said, crucify him. Don't be on that side of history. Be on the side that sees their need for this God becoming a man and dying as a savior for humanity in the face of human moral failure. We talk about the problem of evil, but don't we all contribute to it? And that is where Jesus becomes relevant, because the Creator God has entered our story and has made a way for imperfect people to be joined to a perfect God. If you're being honest with yourself, I think that we can all admit that we are not morally perfect, and that there is a need for us to be joined to holiness. That way has been made through Jesus. He has given us his innocence on the cross and taken our guilt upon himself. What some have called the great exchange. So let's go beyond mere scientific and logical arguments and look at the glory and the beauty and the story of what God has done for humanity in Christ on the cross and in his resurrection. At least consider it. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.